Good morning from Maitland, Florida. This is Mary-Jeanine, and I'm coming to you live from the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore World Headquarters. I love saying that. I hope you are doing well. Please comment. Let us know where you're coming from. And I'd love to see all those comments. I enjoyed meeting a lot of you at the AQS show in Daytona Beach and doing my little AccuQuilt demos. Got a lot of information here to talk about. I'll be talking about this quilt behind me and a whole bunch of others behind me. But I wanted to start out by telling you some of the classes that I'll be teaching coming up in this next quarter. We just last night finished putting them all online, so people are already starting to sign up. But before I do that, I have an announcement that I'm very excited about. Some of you have been with me since the beginning, which was, I want to say 2009, so however many years that was, 13 years ago. And until March 2020, we were doing this live in person in the event room. And I'm glad to say that we'll be coming back to you in May. April, I forgot, and I scheduled a trip. So we'll do it in May. We're going to switch it over to Mondays, face-to-face in the morning. But if you work or you, for some reason, can't get here, or you're still worried about pandemic, then you'll also be able to watch it live on Facebook and YouTube, just like you are now. But we're going to switch it from fourth Saturday to fourth Monday. And if you come in, we'll have a room for you in our big event room. Hopefully there won't be too many people, but come early because the parking can get a little dicey. So usually people like to park over in the gas station just south of the store. So anyway, so we got Tampa, we got Milton, wow, Miami, Lake Mary, hi Kelly, Wesley Chapel, all kinds of great people. Hi Tara, and Betty's from Shirley. Hi, Shirley is saying hi. Oh, she's saying hi, Shirley, I guess. And Betty, I just remembered I forgot to send you the handout. By the way, before I begin, there is a handout, and Gabriella, my tech person here today, is going to put the link for the handout. If you haven't already printed it out from the email, then she's going to put the link, and it'd be good if you could print it out because it's 5 pages, I think. I've got lots of free patterns and some good information about half square triangles at the end of the handout. So be sure to print out your handout. And then finally, of course, if you've been with me for a while, you know there's a 15% discount all weekend. So we'll put that discount code up in a minute. I'm keeping Gabriella busy over here. So there's your discount code, TTT. That goes in at the end of your order when you place your order. And so I'll be talking about a few items that may be of interest. And if you'd like them, then put them in your basket and get your 15% off. All right, so I'm just going to quick tell you about my classes. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comments. Gabrielle is going to keep an eye on the comments for me, but I'm just going to keep talking because I want to get to the instructional part, but I also want to tell you about the classes that I've got. So in no particular order, except this is the way I've got them piled up on my thing. This is my bookcase quilt, and this filled almost immediately as soon as we put it online. And so I promise you, I will keep teaching it until nobody else wants to take the class. When I do teach a class, I try to make it a different day of the week each quarter. And that way, if you can't make Mondays, then maybe next time it'll be a Tuesday or a Wednesday or some such. So anyway, the first of the 2 classes, the first one, we build our books, and I teach you how to build these just books out of different types of fabric. And then the second class, we'll talk all about applique. And I'm going to talk about 2 different ways to do applique. The pattern has one way, and I have another way. And then you get to choose which one you like the best. There's no right way. There's lots of great ways to do applique. This is machine applique, by the way, not hand applique. Me no hand applique. So anyway, that's the bookcase quilt, and that is May 19th and 26th. So it's in May. I didn't write down dates on day of the week on here, so you can look that up. But again, if that doesn't work for you, I'll do it again next quarter. This is called June Bloom, and it is, whoops, I got another one here. This is, actually, there's actually no sewing on this until you go to quilt it and bind it. And actually, I've got a faced binding on here, a faced finish. There's actually, you don't see any binding from the front. And this is all collage. So you're attaching fabric with a fusible web, not fusible interfacing, but a fusible web. And that is, let's see, June bloom is June 1st and 8th. And we do have kits for the fabric, so you don't have to go look for all these 32 different pieces of fabric. We've got plenty of kits available for that. If you don't want to take the class and you just want to make this beautiful wall hanging, you can still buy a kit. You can still buy a pattern. So that's June bloom. And this is foundation piecing. This class filled last quarter before I even posted a picture. And there's already 4 people signed up. So if you want to learn foundation paper piecing, this is not English paper piecing, this is foundation. So we're sewing our fabrics to a piece of paper that has lines on it. And that is how we're able to get these nice sharp points, right? And then when we're all done making the top, then we take the paper off. And so it's just a good technique to have in your arsenal of quilting. So when you get a quilt, a pattern there's a little bit or a lot of paper piecing, you'll know how to do it. This is actually a free pattern that I developed on Electric Quilt, so you don't have to spend any money on the pattern and just need a few fat quarters that are on the supply list. So I've scheduled it for April 4th, so it's at the very beginning of the quarter because it was so popular. I figured it would fill pretty quickly, and it is. So you got 4 more seats, and then again, I will teach it again next quarter, I promise, because it's what everybody wants to learn right now. This is called Log Cabin Lean-To. And the reason I gave it that name is because, let's just look at one of the blocks here. Normally, log cabins start in the center and work their way out. But in this case, it only has 2 walls. This is the center and it has 2 walls. So it's a lean-to as opposed to a whole entire cabin. So it was just a silly little name. But the cool thing about this pattern is it uses 10-inch squares. So if you bring 40 10-inch squares, you will go home, well, you'll finish with 40. You're not going to make them all in the class, but you'll finish with 40 blocks. So if you bring 20 10-inch squares, you'll go home with 20 blocks, or you'll finish. And then, of course, a little bit of inner border, a little bit of outer border, a little bit of binding. So that is called Log Cabin Lean-To, and it is June 29th. So that's by the way, our classes are either 1-star for beginner or 2-star for intermediate. Beginner is you've never used a sewing machine before, or you've never used a rotary cutter or barely, and you want to get some tips to just begin. And sometimes people come to a class and they do okay, but I suggest to them that maybe they want to go back and take a quilting basics class, because I teach everything to do with rotary cutting, everything to do with pressing, how to get a scant 1/4 inch seam, how to baste a quilt, how to bind a quilt, everything to do with making a quilt in 6 hours. So sometimes it fills some of those holes that maybe you've been sewing for a while and you didn't know there were updated techniques, and that might be a good class. So my quilting basics class, I teach it once a month, so April, May, and June. And I highly recommend it if you haven't taken it. It usually fills, all the classes are full, but it's a great class. And I also recommend to people if they want to take it again, just because they're going to learn new things every time they hear me talk about the same stuff. They'll just learn new things. So there you are. And I have a comment. Oh, Nancy from Puerto Rico. Nancy, what are you doing in Puerto Rico? Welcome everybody. All these great. Let's see. Yeah, Claudia, June bloom is a beautiful. It's one of the. I look for just wonderful quilts to bring to classes, and that one, I just love it so much. This is a tumbler class. It's the very last AccuQuilt class I'll be teaching here at the sewing studio, and that makes me sad, but we're no longer going to be carrying AccuQuilt machines and dies, because the AccuQuilt company is going in a different direction. They're still going to sell it, but we're not going to be buying it from them anymore. Anyway, so I'm teaching it Monday, but there's a few more openings in that class if you're interested. And so that's the tumbler. It's a 4.5-inch tumbler. And if you really like tumblers like I do, you can make other things with your tumblers. I made this bag and I carry it everywhere. And I made selvage fabric, and then I ran it through my with my tumbler die, plus just some plain purple fabric. to make this bag. So lots of different things you can do with tumblers. If you've been with me for a while, you've seen the flags I've made, and I've got another quilt that I need to quilt on. But anyway, it's a great design, or I should say it's a great die for 5-inch squares. If you've got a hunk of 5-inch squares, you're looking to do something with them, the tumbler works great for that die. Some other classes, brand new class. Lisa, one of my students, brought in this book, and she said, would you please teach out of this book? And I looked at it and I was totally amazed. They really are stunning 3D quilts. And so I'll show you the one I'm working on at home. You'll see it next month. So this is called Chain Link, and I'm working on it with my design wall. And so it was kind of in pieces and parts, and that's why you're not seeing it today, but hopefully it'll be here within the month. But it just takes 4 colors, 3 fabrics of each color, and then some background fabric. So if you want to take the class, which is 3D, June 2nd and 9th, then you'll buy the book, and then you'll look on page, and I have it on the supply list, you'll look on page 29 for all the amounts of fabric that you need to make this quilt. But let me just show you what some of the other, there's, let's see, looks like 12 different quilts that you could make with this thing. And I'm just going to give you a quick little tip. If you buy the book, she talks about it. But here's the pattern, right? This is what I'm following. And you look at this, you're like, where do you even begin? So here's her tip, and I'm just doing it. I make my pieces a column at a time. I'm going to get it straightened out here. So I clip this little guide to my book on the top and the bottom with little binder clips. And then I know that I've got to have 3 background fabrics, and then a light purple and a medium purple and 2 background fabrics. And so this is what I sew. And when it's completely done, then I take my binder clips off and scooch it down over a notch. And yeah, so it's a pretty cool book. So that's coming in June, because I'll be finished by then. So that's the 3D quilts. And again, if it's popular, if you guys like it, we'll keep doing it. Another brand new class that I'll be teaching is how to quilt with your walking foot, and something I've been wanting to do for a while. This is a fabulous book. She's got a walk and then a walk 2. So if you take this class, you'll be getting this book by Jackie Gehring, who I believe started the modern quilt movement. She was president of the national organization, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but anyway, she's big name in the modern quilting industry, and she wrote this book, and it's fabulous. And I've been doing a little bit of walking foot quilting for years and years, but this kind of pulls it all together in one place. So if you have taken my machine quilting class, that's the prerequisite. Or if you've been quilting 2, 3, 4 quilts and you understand about thread and needles and batting and basting and all that, because I won't be covering all that. I'll just be covering how to quilt with your walking foot. So either prerequisite, take my other class, my machine quilting class, or you've quilted for a while. So my machine quilting class, thank you for asking, is April 29th or June 6th. So you have 2 opportunities to take that class before I teach the walking foot class. Let's see, foundation, binding class is June 16th. I always do one of those. And then finally, my Star Pop class, which is this quilt behind you, this will be a class, and I'll talk all about this, but it'll be May 2nd and May 9th. And so once we get into it, you may like, okay, I really need to take a class on this. So it's a 2-star class, which means it's intermediate, because we've got half square triangles, and it's a pretty fussy quilt as far as getting those scant 1/4 inches. So if you're still struggling a little bit with your 1/4 inches, or you're just not real sure about half square triangles or a couple other things I'll talk about, then maybe take my quilting basics and work your way up to this class. It's not hard. It just has some concepts that you may not be familiar with. I don't teach anything that's super hard, because I don't want to make anything that's super hard. I just want to have fun. I think that was everything. And if there's any questions or comments, please put it in the comments, and we will address that. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about Star Pop behind me. It's a very modern quilt, I think. And the nice thing about the pattern, pardon me, the nice thing about the pattern, where are we, is that it comes in, it looks like 7 different sizes. So if you want to make something bigger or smaller than the one I've got, then please do so. I think in my supply list, I said, this is the small throw. This is the second to the largest, second to the smallest size is a small throw, but there's a baby size, a large throw, twin, full, queen, and king. So of course it tells you how much fabric you're going to need to buy to make this quilt. I'm going to show you what a block looks like. Gabriella, why don't we do an overhead? So this is the one block. I'm going to put this pattern here so you can see where we're going here. But there's actually two different blocks, as you'll see. They're facing different directions, right? I've got a star up on the top left, bottom right, and then I have another one on the top right, bottom left. And then when you put them together, you can see where the stars begin to come together with 4 blocks. When I first started building this, I said, oh, I need a whole bunch of half square triangles. So I just started making them, and it turned out I made too many. I didn't count. And then I started putting them together with other pieces, and then realized I put half of them together wrong. So don't do what I did. Spend some time reading the pattern, and don't just make a whole bunch of one thing and then find out. I mean, it's deceptively simple, but still, I managed to make a bunch of mistakes. So anyway, so we've got a half square triangle, well, actually 2 half square triangles, kind of looks like a butterfly, which makes it a little easier to put together. And 2 more over here. We've got the 2 white squares, and then everything else is pink. So this is I forget the size of these pieces. It's in the pattern. You got 3 of those, 4 half square triangles, and then 2 white squares. And I'm going to spend most of my day today, hour, whatever, talking about half square triangles. So I made these half square triangles according to the pattern, but then I realized after I did it, I just, there's a much better way to do it. And so we're going to talk about that. She has you cutting 3.5 inch squares. Maybe can't see it. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to show you some other ways it might be even better for you, and you get to choose. So yeah, so it's a great pattern. It's well written. I'm very impressed. And that is the block. We're going to head back up to the quilt, Gabriella. So I used a line of fabrics that we have, like pastel batiks. These are actually batiks. So I chose like a printed batik and more of a solid, reads as it's not a solid, but it's a little more solid-y. So in green, one in purple, one in blue, one in teal, one in yellow, one in pink. And then I had an extra, I think these pinks were extra. So you have to have 11 fat quarters for this size. And each fat quarter makes multiple blocks. The white, I'm not a big fan of just a solid white. I think it's a lot more interesting to throw in. I don't know if you can see it, but this is more of a reads as a solid. There's little daisies and dots. So that's in there. And then I quilted it with just a loop-de-loop design. When you take my machine quilting class, I start you out with this loop-de-loop design because everybody can do it. So in some places I did double loops, but it's the same idea. So it's a very simple way to quilt a quilt. And as I always like to say, when you're quilting something with so many intersections, I like to use a small enough design that at some point my line goes over these intersections, because when you wash and dry a quilt a lot, let's say it's for a child, the first thing that's going to go are the intersections, because if you don't nail them down with your quilting, they're kind of like little mountains and they get worn down. And so I make sure with all my quilting, but especially children quilts, to hit those intersections with my quilting stitch. And so when you're freehanding your stitching, you can absolutely do that. If you do it with a computer, maybe you can't, but at least I can do that with. That's a good reason to freehand a quilt. We're gonna back up here, Gabriella. I'm just showing the back real quick. There's the back. And I say this quite often, but when you're backing, can't really see my embroidery, by the way, but I just got a brand new embroidery machine, a little baby lock flourish, and I love it. And it just made a beautiful, it's kind of white, so it's hard to see. But what I want to say about the back is that if my quilt is wider than, let's say, 40 inches, and I know I'm going to need a wider back, what I like to do is cut off the bolt fold, just the merest little skinny little bit of off the bolt fold. Now I have two pieces of the same width, and then I'm going to insert something down the center, which I did here, all the leftovers from the front. I literally used up every scrap I had for this quilt on the back, but I inserted this, and that way when I'm basting my quilt, and maybe the quilt doesn't come down straight down, but it comes off a little bit, if I were to add my extra pieces to the sides, and I'm going to have these weird long triangles on the sides of my quilt, but if I put my extra fabric on the center of the quilt and it's a little cockeyed, it's not going to show. And then it looks like you meant to do it. So that's why I put my excess fabric on the center of the back. Hopefully that makes sense. I've got the link for the handout there, Gabriella had put, and we've got the link for the discount sheet, and my, hopefully up there somewhere is my favorites. So as I'm talking about things, this pattern, by the way, should be on my favorites, Star Pop, so you can pick that up. We'll also have plenty if you're going to take the class. So this is the pattern. She's got a really cute line as well. And we have several different lines of fabric that would work for this. This is just the one I chose. So it would be really nice with Christmas fabric too, I think. If you did reds and greens with some white stars, I think that would be awesome. All right, so I think that's everything I wanted to say about Star Pop, unless you have a question. We are going to continue on and talk about the handout, which looks like this, a happily ever after, except I'm going to start with a different quilt. I'm going to start with a different quilt than the happily ever after. So turn the page. Boy, I'm glad I'm tall. All right, so turn the page to Radiant Star. And the reason I'm starting with that is that it's a better explanation of the first little demo I want to do. I want to talk about a product called Triangulations. This is not the first time I've talked about it, but I am a huge, huge fan of this product. What it is, it's taped together. There's a CD inside, but this is what it looks like. There's a CD inside, and in that CD are all these PDFs, and each PDF has diagrams that you print out. I'll show you what it looks like in a second here. And you print these out any size you want. Each page, it's like 40 or 50 pages. Each page will have a different size. Look, for example, half square triangles, which is what I'm pointing to here. Quarter square triangles, which is this, and then finally flying geese. So in 3 different types of shapes with this one $27.95 product. You buy it once and you'll use it for the rest of your life. I use this product all the time. What I've done is I've downloaded everything off the CD into a folder under my name, and that way it's called Triangulations. I go down to there, I pull up, do I want to make half square triangles, quarter square triangles, or flying geese, and I pull up that file, figure out which one I want to print. I print out on thin paper. You can buy our Carol Doak paper if we have any in stock, or you can go and buy the thin paper at the Office Supply or Amazon. Everybody's got the thin paper. The reason why we buy it thin, because it makes it easier to tear off the fabric later. Yep, pretty thin. So we're gonna, let's see. Let's do the overhead, Gabriella. So this is a little demo on how I use this paper. So we went from a CD to a file on my computer to print out this handout. And so here it is. That's a pretty big, 4 inches. So they can only afford to fit a few on a page. I have another example here, quarter square triangles, and you can get more per page. But when you're getting pretty big, this is how many I get. So I'm going to trim that off because I really only need this much of that piece of paper. Okay, so here it is. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my dark fabric, put it down first. Take my light fabric, put it down next. And the reason for that is it's an ironing thing. It's a pressing thing. You'll see later. put my paper on top of that pile and by the way, this is a little bigger, but don't worry, it'll get all trimmed up nice and beautiful. And I'm going to have you turn actually to the last page of the handout. And we're talking about some various methods for half square triangles. And the first one I have is triangulations. So that, yes, there's an upfront cost, but then you can print out any size you want of half square triangles, quarter. Okay. Use a smaller stitch, maybe 1.8 or a 2.0. Make it easy to tear off the paper. There's lots of instructions in here, so I didn't retype them. But basically, once you layer up your 3 things, I'm going to go ahead and put maybe 3 pins in here. I don't know if you can see it, but there are dotted lines. There's 3 lines here. Got a dotted, a straight, and a dotted, or solid, I should call it. Dotted, solid, and dotted. So I'm going to sew on all the dotted lines. So I'm going to sew, turn the corner, and come back this way. I'm going to sew, turn the corner, and come back this way. Okay, so that's all the sewing I need to do. 4 lines. Okay. Now I'm going to take it to my cutting board and put this down here. I'm just going to pretend, but you're going to get the idea. And I'm going to cut on the solid lines. So first I'm going to cut around on those solid lines so it's nice and clean. And that is really awesome because that means when I'm finished cutting my triangles and pressing them, I'm done. I don't have to do any trimming. And I don't know about you, but trimming, if you're doing a whole bunch of triangles, that trimming thing is no fun. I did it for the Star Pop quilt. I'm like, oh yeah, that's why I use triangulations. And then once I've been all the way around, I'm going to cut the straight line here, the straight line here, and then finally one across there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cuts. And then it's going to look like something like this. And I've just got the one because this one's been pressed. But now I've got these here. Look at this. I've got paper, I've got light blue, and I've got dark blue. So there's my half square triangle. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of those for that one piece of paper. It gave me 4. If it's a smaller half square triangle, I'm probably going to get 8 or 10 out of one sheet of paper. I actually leave the paper on until I finished pressing because the paper stabilizes that very bias seam. And then once I've pressed it and let it cool, then I can go back and tear off my paper. And then I've got my half square triangle. So the tearing off the paper does take a little bit of time, but it's so worth it. I forgot to say one more thing. One more thing is she has you cut off your dog ears. And what is a dog ear? A dog ear, we'll talk about these again, but the dog ear is if you were to just sew this line here, you're going to have these big old triangles that poke out, and you're going to have to deal with them later on or cut them off. But here she gives you a line where you can cut off the triangles first. I'll lay that down so you can see that. And that when you open it up, then there's no dog ears coming out the ends. So lovely, lovely, lovely. As you can tell, I'm a huge fan of triangulations. I do use it a lot. I'm going to show you lots of other ways, and there's pros and cons for every way. So you get to decide for each project which one might work well for you. But that's triangulations. So the pro is there's no trimming afterward. You can make any size. Let's say you're in the middle of the night and you can't sleep and you want to start a quilt and, oh, there's half square triangles. Oh, I have to get to the store tomorrow and buy some thangles, which, by the way, we don't carry thangles anymore. This is a much better product. But thangles, you have to know what size to buy. There's a pack of them and that's great. But if you bought the wrong size or you've got some in your stash that aren't going to work for the next quilt, you have to go get another set. With this system, I can print any size I want, anytime I want, because the CD, it belongs to me. So I got thread on me here. All right, so that's triangulations. So, and that was, so we're going to look at this quilt for a moment. If you go back to your handout, which is the second page on the handout. I missed that comment there. Tara said, this reminds me of triangles on a roll. Yes, I have used triangles on a roll. I made a table runner and it was awesome. So it's a very similar concept, yes. And Tara says it's similar except you get one of every size. Yes, exactly. And you can print as many as you want on the paper. So that it's a beautiful thing. Like I say, I've talked about it multiple times, but it really is a great product. And I'm a huge fan of Brenda Henning, by the way. I've got many of her books. She lives in Alaska, Bear Paw Productions, and she's just a great quilter. I hope to meet her someday. Anyway, this is called Radiant Star. And if you were to look at the second handout, this is a Lone Star quilt. This is not the one I made, but I'm just showing as an example that if you've ever made a quilt like this, you know you're working with lots of diamonds, right? And you have to, even if you strip piece it, you're still working with diamonds, and you have to be very careful of the bias. And it's not an easy quilt to make. And so we came up with this design because it's a very similar look, but you don't have all those crazy diamonds to deal with. And if you look carefully, you're working with all half square triangles. This is a half square. This is a square, but this is a half square triangle. This is a half square triangle. This is a half square triangle. Everything is either squares or half square triangles. So you're getting the look of a Lone Star, but not the crazy, bias edges. And I've had students who have tried the other way with all the diamonds, and it's a little frustrating if you're not familiar with using all those diagonal pieces or diamond pieces. Sorry. So yes, I've taught this class several times to other guilds. It's just a great quilt. Of course, you could throw some borders on. If you've been with me for a while, you've seen this border before. I actually used it on the floor at my last house. I had them put a tile rug under my kitchen table, and I used this pattern because I love it. I used it for the first time on my parents' 50th anniversary quilt, and I've been using it ever since. So it's a good way to use up all your leftover half square triangles, which is all that is. So, and then in the bottom of the handout, make it your own. I've got some other creative ideas for you if you don't want yours to look exactly like this. The squares could be bigger, they could be smaller. You could put borders on. So yeah, lots of possibilities with this quilt. I love this quilt. And of course, make it in lots of different colors. All right, any questions about that one, or we are going to continue on? All right. Yes, Regina, you are going to have to get that one. Now we're going to switch back to page 1, which is Happily Ever After. This quilt is too big to hang, so I'm just going to hold it up for you for a few minutes. This quilt is, my husband had to go out to the camper and get it out of the Ziploc bag that we keep it in, because this is my camping quilt. And it's big. I'm going to lift it up for a moment here. But there's a picture of it. There's a picture of it on your handout, so you can get that. But if you look carefully, there's really only 2 blocks. There's a log cabin block and a, what is that called? Split star block. And we're going to talk about the split star block. Also, if you've been with me for a while, you know that I love using thrifted cotton shirts from the thrift store. So I get them in blues and reds and whites. I get them in stripes and plaids. And then I chop them up and make things with them. And I've made 7 or 8 different quilts with this particular collection of fabric, so to speak. And yeah, so let's talk about how that's done. Throw this over in this pile here. So we're going to go to the handout. Hopefully all of you have the handout. If not, we'll put the link up one more time for the handout. If you're just joining us and you didn't know there was a handout, the handout has 4 free patterns plus some text on the last page in regard to half square triangles. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this split star block. So if you look carefully, it's got some plain corners, it's got some half square triangles, and then it has quarter square triangles. So now that you're familiar with triangulations with the half square triangles, I'm going to introduce you to what a quarter square triangle looks like. What have I got here? So this is the block, by the way. And I'm going to orient it the same way that you see on your on your handout. Okay, this, by the way, is the log cabin block. So when I'm cutting squares and triangles or whatever, I have leftover bits. So I cut them into 1.5 inch strips. And then I'm always making log cabin quilts with just those strips. So that's that. But what the heck is a 1/4 square triangle? Here we go. So you have to do 2 sets of sewing. So the paper for that 1/4 square triangle from Triangulations, again, that product I was just talking about, you can print out, oh, sorry, that's half square. Half square. Oh, yeah, this is half square. That's what I want. No, I want 1/4 square. Never mind me. Losing my mind over here. Okay, those are half square. Put them away. This is 1/4 square triangle. So again, you print it out based on your finished size, and I want my finished size to be 3 inches. They start out at 3.5, but finished means when all the seams are sewn, that's the finished size. And again, I'm going to sew on the places where it has a dotted line, and then I'm going to cut on all the solid lines. So there it is. And if I were to take my ruler and cut all the solid, first thing I'll do is I'll go around the whole thing, trim up the edges, and then cut. And again, I love this because there's no trimming later. If I clean up all those edges and then I cut, those pieces come out exactly the size I need. No more trimming afterward. So this is what's going to happen here. I've got this piece here, and I cut off 2 of the triangles to show you what they look like. And there is a half of the block and the other half of the block. And when you press all this and set it up, you are, and the dark is on the bottom, like instructions say, and you press this, that presses all the seam allowances to the dark. So then when I go to sew this, right sides together, those nest in really nicely, and you get these perfect 1/4 square triangles every time. So that's how I made that section. So again, half square triangles with one kind of paper, 1/4 square triangles with another kind of paper. Cut my 3-inch pieces just with a rotary cutter, and I can create that block. So again, it's an awesome block made easy with Triangulations. So let me know if you have any questions. I haven't been watching for questions. So if there's any questions, Gabrielle will put them up there for me or highlight them, and I can answer your questions. Or hopefully everything is just so clear that you get it completely. Hopefully. By the way, I quilted that quilt. I used wool batting because we like to camp. Where it's cold, so I use wool batting, and it does work. Triangulations, is that similar to ink lingo? Ink lingo, excuse me, I have to get a drink. Ink lingo is something you run through your printer, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's more for hand piecing. If someone wants to Google that for me, but I'm pretty sure you can print out, she gives you a sheet of, let's say, hexagons, and you print them out, and then you English paper piece or just hand sew them together. So it's been a while since I played with ink lingo. I downloaded some sample sheets and I used them, but now I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure it's for hand piecing. All right. Thank you for that question. I think that's everything I wanted to say about those 2 quilts. In case I haven't mentioned it, all my quilts today are half square triangles because that's what this TT&T is mostly about. I've got a few other things to talk about, but the quilts are half square triangles. If your computer does not have a CD drive, hi Mo, is there an option to download the PDF files of Triangulations once you buy it? That's a really good question. You know what, Mo, just come over to my house and I'll print it out for you once you buy it. Or find somebody with a CD player, because maybe you can send an email to Brenda Henning at bearpawproductions.com and ask her that. But I don't know. Now that people are not having CD players, maybe she's got another way to go and I'm not familiar with it. So yeah, good question though. Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about more about half square triangles. I call this quilt Floralicity because it's very floral. My friend Lynn Sweeney gave me a big pile of floral fabrics years and years ago, and I made 3 different quilts with that pile, and each quilt had a different background fabric. So this one is really adorable. It's little daisies, so I quilted it with daisies. And I just sorted the fabric by colorway, and that's how I ended up with this design, because I had just enough pieces to do this design. And yeah, so lots of large half square triangles. And we're going to talk another way to make half square triangles, because these are so big that it really wouldn't make much sense to use triangulations, because you'd only get, 2 half square triangles per sheet of paper, and maybe you don't want to waste that much paper on just 2 sheets. So we're going to talk about some other ways to make half square triangles. So when you're making a decision about which method you should use, the size is pretty indicative of what you should do. So let's talk about that. The size of your, so anything more than, I'd say 4 inches, you probably want to use this method, which is I'm going to take 2 squares of fabric, put them right sides together, and I don't know if you can see it better from here. I drew a line with chalk or a pen, which I'll do again in a moment, and then sewed on either side of that line, right? Sewed on either side of that line, and that gives you, I have no fingernails. It gives you 1 and 2 half square triangles, right? But not problem. The con on this is then you're going to have to trim those triangles. So here is one and here is the other, right? I've cut them in half and there it is. But now this needs to be trimmed. And there's multiple ways to do that trimming. I thought I had a big ruler here, but I guess not. That's okay. I have another product. Oh, I know where it is. It's under this pile here. Okay. So one way to trim this would be to get your ruler. I happen to love my 8.5-inch ruler. When I talk about rulers, I talk about the fact that yes, there's tons of specialty rulers out there, but these 2 rulers are the ones I use the most. These are the ones that sit on top of my cutting table. This is a 6x24, and it has my gypsy gripper, which is in my favorites. And the reason I like the gypsy gripper, it's not to hold the ruler down so much as it allows me to pick it up easily and fast. I have no fingernails, so if I want to pick up this ruler, I have to slide it down to an edge and pick it up that way. But this way, if you've taken any classes, you know I'm Mrs. Efficient. So I'm always looking for efficiencies, and this is one of them. It allows me to pick this up and put it down super fast. And then the same thing with this pop socket. We have some suction cups which work really well, and I have suction cups for other specialty rulers that I need. But for this particular one, because it's going to stay on here all the time because I use it so much, I bought myself a pop socket. And then this ruler is an extension of my hand, right? So it's an easy way to pick it up. So one way to trim would be to line up my diagonal line on my half square triangle, cut it, and then either use a Lazy Susan or just flip it over and do it again. And this time I do it to get the exact right size I need. Let's say 6 inches or 6 1/4, whatever. So that's one way to do it, to make these. I'm going to show you a couple other ways. And I want to have you, I'm running all over the place here, but I want you to switch back to the last page of your handout. And I talk about lots of ways to make half square triangles. So let's just get into that now. The very first thing, how not to make a half square triangle. This is how not to make it. Cutting up, we're going to do this. Cutting up triangles like this and then sewing. And the reason I don't want you to do it this way is this is 100% bias, right? So when you're sewing, it's very easy to stretch it or get it out of alignment. Plus, you've got these dog ears, and what's going to happen when you put this under your foot of your machine? It's probably going to get chewed up and spit out by your machine. So that is one way not to make a half square triangle. Unless you cut your triangles with the AccuQuilts. A lot of you have the AccuQuilt machine. I use my little value die. And what I did is I took my pink and my blue, put them on top of each other, and cut. It'll be 4 triangles that I've already sewed one, but I got 4 more. So if you put them right sides together, then all you have to do is pick this up, take it to your machine, and sew. And because there's no dog ears there, your machine is gonna act much better for that. So that would be the only way I would recommend actually cutting triangles and sewing them. Other than that, if you don't have AccuQuilt, don't be doing that. All right, so let's talk about some ways to do it. We talked about triangulations. I think I pretty much covered that. I'm not going to talk a lot about thangles. Some of you may have thangles in your stash from before, and you're like, what the heck are these? They're basically strips of paper that allow you to create thangles. I was watching a video on them the other day, and one nice thing is there's not a lot of waste, and the way they angle them on there, so when they're finished, you can use the same strip you were cutting your thangles on. You can use it to make your squares to go along with. So for instance, if you bought a thangle to make these blocks here, then out of the same strip you sewed that, you could actually cut your squares with. So that's a nice thing about thangles. But again, you have to make sure you have the right size for whatever project you're working on, which is why I like triangulations, because all the sizes are available to me. I think they're like 1/8 of an inch or at least 1/4 of an inch difference. So you have lots of sizes. Okay, so that's thangles. Magic 8, Easy 8. I have a little demo for you. Some of you may be familiar with this concept. It's pretty cool. Let's say you want to make, and I have a handout for you that you can print out off somebody else's website. You want to make, let's say you want to make 2.5 inch half square triangles. You want them to be finished at 2.5 inches. You're going to take a 7-inch. Did I create a 7? I didn't. Well, this is 10 inch. So, okay, we'll just go down here. Let's say we're going to make 4-inch half square triangles, which look like this. Okay. So I'm going to take 2 fabrics, and my little cheat sheet says I need a 10-inch piece, 2 10-inch pieces of fabric if I want to finish at 4 inches. So here we go, 10 inches and 10 inches. Okay. Right sides together. I'm going to draw a diagonal line, and really you can use anything. If you've got a Fixon pen, I literally just use my regular drawing pen. If you have a Sharpie, a thin Sharpie, really anything, because that marking is not going to show on the front of the quilt. And just a quick note about Fixon pens, F-R-I-X-I-O-N. I love Fixon pens because the marks iron away, but I never ever use them on the front of my fabric because the marking could come back in the cold. Hot heat takes it away, but cold brings it back. And also sometimes they leave a ghost of a line on your fabric, and there's no prediction on what kind of fabric it will leave a ghost of a line. And there's too many sad stories I've seen. People post pictures of their quilt and their Fixon lines are ghosting, and they're like, how do I get this out? You don't. You cover it up with an applique. So we never use them on the front, but you can certainly use them on the back. So I'm going to take my just regular writing pen that I just pulled off my desk, and if I go slowly enough, there's a line there. And again, draw another diagonal. All right. Having done that, I can switch to the next thing, which is this. And you know, I'm going to flip it over because it's hard for you to see that I used the wrong color thread. But I basically took that line and sewed 1/4 inch on either side of that line. I'm sure that's quite clear there. And here's where the magic happens. I'm going to move everything out of the way. And I'm going to take my rotary cutter and my long ruler, because this is way too long for my 8-inch ruler. And I'm holding, you all know, if you've ever taken a class from me, we don't hold this because it could shift. I'm going to hold down here and make that cut. Not going to move a thing. Very, very careful here. Make another cut. And you know, if it's not 100% 1/4 inch, that's okay. Everything's in the seam allowance. And then here's the magic. I'm going to line everything up. I guess I need my glasses here just to be sure I'm lining things up properly. And then I'm going to make a horizontal cut. You see how easy it is to pull up that ruler? So if you're having trouble with your 6.5-inch ruler, your long ruler, highly recommend this gypsy gripper. Okay, so there it is. Whoops. I don't know if it's my ruler or my cutter or the mat, but I've got a couple hairs here, but that's okay. It's done the job. So this is, it's called the Magic 8 because I now have 8 half square triangles to my name. There may or may not be trimming. There probably will be, but I have some trimming ideas for you. But this makes really fast work of half square triangles. And in fact, this is what I would recommend for the Star Pop quilt, the very first pastel quilt I showed you, because I think they would be faster and easier than the way she has you doing this. You just have to rearrange the way you cut your fat quarters, but it can be done. If I were to do it again, that's how I would do it. So what do we got here? We're going to, yep. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off my dog ears. I can cut off my dog ears like that, or I have this awesome product called slotted trimmer. Whoops, slotted trimmer. And we have these on order. We ordered them a while ago. They should be here soon. So put them in your basket, and then when they arrive, we'll ship you everything here. But these cut 11 different sizes of half square triangles, 1 alignment, 2 cuts. So here's how it works. So these are 4.5. I want these to finish at 4.5. So these are all my half: 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5. And this ruler is for whole numbers. So it's 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, 5 inch, 6 inch. So I get 11 different sizes. So here's how it works. I'm going to place the ruler, the 4.5-inch line. I want it finished at 4.5. So I don't know if you can see it, but there's a dotted line. I'll just put it here. There's a dotted line for this 4.5. But the dotted line on my sewing line, which makes sense because a sewing line is a dotted line. And there's just a teensy bit of trimming here to do, but it's important to do it. Oh, you know what? I just did that in an ambidextrous way. So I'm going to do it again in a single hand way. Let's say you're right-handed. You're going to turn it like this a little bit more. So was my head in the way? Oh, we're going to come down. Thank you. Beautiful. Okay. Whose hands are those? Holy mackerel. Those are old hands. All right, so if you just want to use one-handed cut, you're going to cut like this, and then you're going to cut like this. No ambidextrous needed. Okay, not done here because this has this really cool thing. Whoops. Anyway, left-handed cut. But what I'm doing here is I'm cutting off my dog ears. And I'll be honest, there's my dog ears, which is really nice when you're making half square triangles because then you open it up and you don't have those dog ears to deal with. I'll be honest though, when I was using this trimmer to trim all my half square triangles for this pattern, what I did instead is I lined up a bunch of these and just kind of hit them like this. I told you I'm Mrs. Efficient, and then you can flip this over. And I think this is a little bit faster than using the dog ears on the ruler. But you could use it if you want. But each one of these now is going to be trimmed, and it's going to be exactly the size you need. So big fan. I saw this first on Missouri Start Quilt Company. Jenny was showing it, and she was saying that was her favorite way to trim. And I was like, oh, I got to try this. And I love it because you keep them pressed. You keep them together like this, and then you trim them, and then you open them up. So you're not having to cut all 4 sides individually. You only have to cut 2 sides. So if you're left-handed, you would orient the block this way and trim. If you're right-handed, you can orient the block like this and trim. Okay. Hopefully that made sense. So where's all my other ways? Okay, so I give you this cheat sheet. Well, I didn't give it to you. How do you get the print out? I don't know what that means. Oh, the handout. Gabriella is going to put the link to the handout up on the comments, so keep an eye out for that. But on the handout, kind of a midway here, Betty, there is a discount for every time you buy when you purchase things with our discount code. We have a discount code today of TTT. We've got it up there on the screen. And when you order stuff, I should say, I didn't say this yet, but when you order stuff online, or if you were to come into the store and you want to look at stuff and you want to purchase some of the things I've talked about, you can tell the cashier, my discount code is TTT, and you will get your 15% off that way as well. And that is good between now and Sunday night, right, Gabriella? Sunday night, yes, Sunday night. So thank you for asking. Okay, yes, the slotted trimmer, Jan, does work fabulous, and we've got the link up there for the handout. And again, my favorites page is favorite things that I want. We can put that link up in just a moment for the triangulations and the slotted trimmer, everything I've talked about. Again, the slotted trimmer, we ordered it a while ago. It should be in soon, and then we will include it with your order. What was the name of the White Stars High Fae, the pastel? That was called Star Pop, and that was a quilt that I can pull it out in a minute, but you can go back and watch the beginning of the video, but this is called Star Pop, and that pattern is also on my favorites. It's also a class that I'll be teaching in May 2nd and May 9th. And it's half square triangles. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is about kind of in the middle of the last page of the handout, there is a link to a cheat sheet for this magic 8 technique that I just showed you, making 8 at once. And so don't move it. So here's the cheat sheet. You can go there and print it out. I think what happens is you have to give them your email, and then she sends you a link with an email link, inner link, the link in the email, and then you go print it out. But anyway, that's fair. You can always unsubscribe later. And there's your cheat sheet. If you want to make 2.5 inch finished half square triangle, you follow it along, and it says, oh, I need 2 7-inch squares. And then she's got instructions here, just the way I said. You put your squares together, right sides together. You draw your diagonals. You sew on both sides of the diagonals. You make 4 cuts, 2 diagonal cuts and a horizontal cut and a vertical cut. Take them apart, and there's your half square triangles. Again, you will need to trim them a little bit and cut your dog ears off. So that is the magic 8 technique. What else do I want to tell you? So the pro is make 8 at a time. The con is there's a little bit of trimming afterward, probably. So another way to go about all of this, I've mentioned it when I was talking about the quilt behind me, but you're going to draw a line with chalk. By the way, this happens to be, if you've not taken my machine quilting class, you haven't heard me talk about my Chhalkoner, which is a fabulous chalk dispenser. Can you hear this? Put this. So it's got a little wheel at the bottom, and it lays down a beautiful line. You can see it on my ugly hand. Well, this is pink, and it's putting it on pink, so you can't see it. I would recommend either the pink or the blue. Sometimes the yellow doesn't come out of your fabric, but it puts down a beautiful line. I use this a lot, again, on the back of my fabric. Sometimes I use it on the front because it comes out. I also use it when I'm teaching kids because they can't sew a straight line to save their life, and so I'll draw the line they have to use. So yeah, so that goes down the center. I use my ruler to draw the line, sew on either side, cut, trim. So again, we're drawing a diagonal line. And next, I'm going to walk around and talk about the sewing machine here. I'm going to show you some diagonal seam tape. You might have heard me talk about this before. We're going to do it again. So here we go. So diagonal seam tape, here's what it looks like. It comes on a package for $7.50 minus your discount, and it's got 3 fabulous lines on it. So here it is. It's washi tape, by the way. So it kind of goes on like painter's tape, kind of big, generous piece of it. And the red line lines up with my needle, okay? So it's really nice if you've got a fairly large bed on your machine. It's even better if you have the Sew Steady table, or if your machine came with a bigger table, because you can extend that tape pretty far. And the more you can extend it, the larger the blocks you can sew. All right, there they are. Okay, I've got so much stuff up here. So I want to show you how I use the washi tape. What did I do? Just a second. I thought I had a square and I didn't. Give me just a second here. All right. No, for heaven's sakes. You know, I worked in my head how all these demos were going to go, and somehow I missed this particular one, I guess. So I'm going to cut a square here. Just give me a second. No, that's not a square. See, pays to take your time. Okay, perfect. All right. So instead of drawing that line, I've got two squares here, right sides together. All right. And I don't want to sew down the center. I don't want to sew from diagonal to diagonal. I didn't draw it. I'm just going to use my tape. Instead, I want to sew 1/4 of an inch away from that line. So I'm going to chain piece here. So I've got some piece that's already there. I'm going to line up. This is the most important thing to look. You're going to eyeball the corner of this fabric with the black line, and I'm going to be sewing on the red line. So hopefully that makes sense. Yep. Okay. So I'm going to put this down, and you kind of have to know where you want to get sewed. You might want to even draw a line there if that is helpful at the beginning. Hit the gas here. So again, I'm eyeballing this. I don't care what my needle is doing, but I want to get that nice straight line there. And then I can flip this around, needle up, flip this around, and I want to do the same thing, but on the other side. And it's hard to see the white on the green, but it's there. So again, the point of the fabric goes to that black line, and down goes my foot, and I'm going to sew it again. Now, get rid of the leader ender. It's hard to see, but I've got two white lines there. I should have chosen a different. I thought I was going to be sewing on dark fabric, and I kind of was. I just wanted to show you. So I've got those AccuQuilt pieces, and those are also handy. This tape is also handy for that because, again, if I'm sewing on the red line, then I'm going to put the edge of the fabric right on that black line and sew. Oops. Yep, see, it's eating my fabric. So I'm going to do another one. Not easy when you're standing in front of the sewing machine, but we'll do our best here. So I'm lining up the black line with the edge of the fabric, and it needs a little bit of adjusting here. Get rid of the fuzzies. And this is something I would highly recommend that you chain piece, because you're cutting off each one. That's not only wasting a lot of thread, but you have the possibility that your machine is going to try to eat that beginning. Even though there's no dog ear, sometimes it still does that. Every machine, no matter how much money you spent on it, will do that sometimes, which is why I like to use leaders and enders. And I can see that my seam allowance is way too big because I don't have my needle adjusted properly. But you get the general idea. Another way to get that lined up perfectly, and I might not have lined up my washi tape perfectly. Just put your needle down. Yeah, oh yeah, boy, I really did not nail that. You see how far off I am? I'm like more than 1/8 of an inch off. That's why my seam allowance is so big. So I would recommend that you take a ruler, maybe smaller than that, a ruler, line everything up, and then put your tape based on that ruler. So I didn't put that on very well at all, but you got the general idea. Washi tape, it's called diagonal seam tape, and it is the bomb. I don't know why they just came up with this. We should have had this all our lives. Okay, I'm gonna scooch around here. All right, another thing I want to talk about, boy, I've made quite a mess here. Another thing I want to talk about is pressing. If you've taken a pressing class with me, you've heard me say this, but for those of you who I have not had the pleasure to meet in a class, and by the way, there's using those 4.5 inch, there's a little thing that I made. We're going to do a little pressing demo here, just super quick. Jan wants to know if you can use a straight stitch needle plate. Remember to change it back when you're done. That is a very good point. She's talking about your machine eating your fabric. If you have a straight stitch plate, that's awesome. Some of you may have seen my video on my 6700 Janome 6700. It has a plate. It's called the HP plate, where I can get a perfect scant 1/4 inch because it hovers over the right feed dog, and it doesn't eat my fabric either, but that's a whole nother topic. And then the other question was, what about a scant 1/4 inch? What about it? Yeah, I'm trying to get a scant. Do you want me to talk about scant 1/4 inch? Tell me what your question is, and I will be glad to answer it. What was I going to do? Oh, press. Bernadette, give me a little more information what you're looking for, and I'll answer it. And until she's able to type all that in, I want to talk about a little bit about pressing. So MJ has three rules of pressing. Number one is I press the seam as I sewed it. And so what that does is it sinks the threads down into the fabric, and I get a nice flat seam. Secondly, and I'm going to flip this over because really I want the dark up, is I can either finger press this open, right? Finger press it open and then press. But what I really want to show you instead, start over here, is you should not just hit this like this, because what you're doing is you are putting a curve in that nice straight bias piece. By hitting it with a curve of your iron, you're going to put a curve, and it may not be very big, but it's there. So instead of doing that, what I'd like to suggest is either finger press it open and press, or since I'm efficient, I'm always looking for efficiencies, I'm going to start at one end and I'm going to press as I go. So I'm going to start at the end and work my way that way. Okay. So that instead of just pushing it, that's fast, but you're not going to get a beautiful quilt. So I want to see you go from one end to the other. Now it's not as flat as I would like it to be. So I would probably hit it with a little mist, because I love my mister. It's a game changer. It's on my favorites page, and then hit it again. And then my third rule. So my first rule was setting the seam. My second rule is don't use the curve of your iron. And my third rule is to let things cool completely. If they're not cool, if they're super hot and you whip it off because you got something else to do, you might wonkify, that's my word, you might wonkify your beautiful block. So let it cool. It's nice to have a big enough board to be able to work on several things at once before you have to work on the next thing. Bernadette says, can you use the washi tape and make a scant 1/4 inch? Yes, thank you. If you move that tape over just a little bit, you get a scanter 1/4 inch. Absolutely. Good question. Thank you. So it just, you kind of play with it based on your machine and how scant you want it and so forth and so on. All right, we can unplug that too. Okay, any other questions about ironing? Does that iron have an auto shut off? That is a very good question, because I'm not familiar with this little Aliso. It gets super hot, I will tell you that. Gabriella, would you happen to know if it has auto shut off? It doesn't, or you don't know? You don't think it does? Okay. I'll tell you my little tip. My machine does have an auto shut off, but I'm still not comfortable with it just being on. So I have one switch under my sewing table. It switches on a light, ironing board, my iron, and my sewing machine. So one switch cuts everything off. So when I'm leaving for the night, I look, and if the light's still on, that means my iron's still on. So one switch takes it all off. So that, if that's helpful. All right. And then Susan says, use the clover fabric folding pen for a flat seam. That's a great idea. I'll have to talk about that next time because it is a great tool. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to tell you. Oh, yes, there is. So we talked about drawing a diagonal line. We talked about the diagonal seam tape, the slotted trimmer. Finally, I want to talk one more thing about, this is a Jenny Doan method for making half square triangles. It's got its good and its bad points, but if you cut a square, actually 2 squares, right sides together, you're going to sew 1/4 inch on all 4 sides. Very easy to do. And then you're going to take your ruler, your long ruler, and you're going to cut this way. And here I am with my ambidextrous. But you know, if you have a small enough mat, or if you have a rotating mat, you wouldn't have to change hands. You would just rotate the mat, because you don't want to move this until you're done with your 2 cuts. But then you get 4 half square triangles. And of course, they could be any size, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, that's the best thing ever. Well, let's wait a minute. Now let's think about this. All 4 sides are bias edges. And I heard her say, I was kind of boning up on all the different ways out there. And I heard her say, but I like that, because then if my piece is a little too small or too big, I can stretch it or make it the right size. I love Jenny so much, but that's not the best advice I've ever heard. So yes, this looks like a really cool thing, but you've got 4 bias edges. So you have to be super careful with your half square triangles. The other thing is knowing how big to make. It's very fiddly to figure. I'm sure there's a chart out there somewhere how big a square you need to make for the half square triangle sizes that you need. So that's something you have to think about too. So yes, it's very cool, but you want to think carefully. Kelly, that is the Aliso, the mini, the Aliso. So it doesn't have the auto shut off, and it doesn't go up and down. Kelly was in my class the other day, and she wasn't sure about that up down thing. A lot of people do love that up down. You know, when you touch it, it goes down onto your fabric. When you take your hand off, it comes up, which is very nice. Some people like that and some people don't. But that mini gets very hot, but it doesn't come up and down. Do you just use water in the mister? I do. Personally, I've never used anything but water in my mister. I have almost stopped using my starch because that mist is so fine and it works so well that I get a nice sharp crease and I don't have to worry about starching things. Last time I starched something was to make a bunch of triangles on my Morning Star quilt that's hanging on the other side of this wall. And there's some AccuQuilt designs that want starch just to make it more successful, but I really don't use starch that much anymore now that I've gotten my mister. Matt asked, is there a pattern for the log cabin lean-to? I live in Tampa, too far. If you send me an email, Matt, my email's at the bottom of the handout, mj@bargwin@outlook.com. I will send you the pattern for that. It's free to the students in the class, so I can send that to you for free. Anybody else? Regina says shivers, whatever. That sounds like a good thing. Bias. Oh, for the bias. Yes, I agree. If you're not a accomplished quilter, I might want to stay away from that Jenny Doan method. Like I said, love the woman to death. She's amazing. She has done so much for the world of quilting, but that particular technique you got to be careful with. Okay. I think I have said everything there is to say about half square triangles, except I have one more quilt, and then it'll be everything. Now you all have to go out and make a half square triangle quilt because it's all in your brain. So this one, I call this a 16 patch big star, and it's the 4th page in my handout. And as you can see, there's 16 patches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 16 patches. There's some half square triangles and there's some squares. So we'll talk about this real quick. If you've been with me for any length of time, you've seen this is probably the 3rd or 4th Stash Buster tip quilt that I ever made. And I talk about it a lot. You might recognize this border because I had it on another quilt. Love the border. And that was just with the leftovers. I had this pack of blue some yellow that matched the blue, the yellow and the blue, and then this. And I used up every little bit I had in the border. And so I'm just going to show you the back real quick. So I had to come back to the store and find some cute panel or something that would work. And this is the very first time I embroidered my label on the back, and I was pretty proud of myself. March 2010, that's how old this quilt is. But I found an empty spot in the, well, it was a panel, but I had to cut it up and insert pieces to make it big enough. And that was the first time that I ever embroidered on the back of the quilt, and I've been doing it ever since. So there you go, 12 years. 12 years ago this month. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about how this quilt is made. This is a great quilt for children. Let's see, where's my, oh, here it is. My last demo here. Again, with the big squares. And you know what? Most of the quilts I've showed you, those half square triangles can be any size. Well, except for Happily Ever After and Star Pop. But if you have more fabric, larger pieces, you can certainly make larger ones. This one, if you were to ask me how big these were, I couldn't tell you, but I will tell you that with one fat quarter, I was able to make 4 of these, which tells me that, sorry, with one fat quarter, I can make actually 8 triangles or 4 squares. So that tells me it was probably started out at about 9 inches. Because I can get 4 9-inch squares out of a fat quarter. So my point here is that rather than trying to get something a specific size, don't waste your fabric. Try to make as big of a piece as you can, and that's how big your quilt ends up. If you have a bunch of 10-inch squares, start out with 10-inch squares. Don't trim them off and then make my half square triangles. Make them as big as you can. And yeah, and then you're just going to, for example, this one matches up with this. Let's back it up a little bit. Matches up with this. So I have 4 of these guys, right? This light medium blue with the yellow. And I have 4 of these guys. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I have 4 of these guys. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's just a bunch of, squares sewn together once you make those half square triangles. I recommend not cutting these corner squares out until you finalize the size. Once you've trimmed these all to be the exact same size, then you can cut your 4 corners to be that same size, if that makes sense. And then, of course, all the leftovers. So Sandra is telling us the Bear Paw Production does sell a digital version to download through Triangulations. So Mo, since you don't have a CD player, that would be a good way to go. Okay, so quick demo. I'm not even sure I need to demo this because I've done this several times. Sheila wants to know if the discount is good at the Lady Lake store. And yes, it is. So good. So you can walk in or you can walk in because they don't have their separate website. How do you enter the discount code when ordering? When you get to the end of your order, there'll be a place to say discount code, just like any other store that you order from. Promo code, discount code is the same thing. So yep, TTT, no ampersand, no nothing else. Okay, so back to the quilt behind me. I just took 2 squares. You put them right sides together. I didn't say this before, but a lot of times I will press these. Just the act of pressing that makes them kiss together really well, and then they won't move around on you. Draw that line, sew on either side of the line. Now I have 2 half square triangles, and you're just going to play around with your colors to make sure you have 4 of each type. So very, very simple quilt. I threw a border on there just because it needed something a little else, but you can certainly, you can do a piece border, you can do a plain border, whatever it takes to get that quilt to be the size you want it to be is what you want to do. Okay, I have 2 more quick things to talk about, and then I'm gonna, I'm going on and on here. I try not to go more than 1 hour and 20 minutes, but sorry about that. So thread stands and thread. So if you've taken my machine quilting class, you've heard me talk about this, but thread comes, boy, it's a complete different topic here. Thread comes in what we call put-ups, different put-ups. This happens to be a King Tut. Is it King Tut or Masterpiece? Yeah, this is King Tut, and it's a cone, of course. Here's a smaller cone from Wonderfill that is called Fantastico, and it's kind of slinky. And then we have So those are cones, and they're wound, cross wound. I'm sorry. Yeah, cross wound. Then we have another thread that I absolutely love. This is also king tut, but this is stacked spool. So in other words, the thread goes up, 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 up on a flat and then down, right? So it's not winding on, look, this one you can see diagonals, right? So it's a different way they wind it. So we have two different ways, the stacked and the cross wound. Okay, so here's some other examples. This is another Wonder Fill out of my stash. So this is cross wound. You can see the lines. They're not stacked. They're like diagonals. Same thing with whatever this is. And then this is a Coats and Clark, and it's like a buttonhole thread it's like the only Coats and Clark I own. It's a buttonhole thread. It's super thick, and it again is stacked. So why am I telling you this? It makes a difference on your sewing machine. If you have a vertical pin, then you are really going to want to purchase stack spools as much as you can, because you want it coming off thread this way. I'm going to do a little demo here. Let's pretend this is a stack spool. So I want the thread coming off like this. If I put a stack spool on a horizontal pin, look what happens to the thread every time I take it off. It introduces another twist. And now those twists are going through your machine, through the tension disc. By the time it gets to the needle, it may break or shred, or in other words, be kind of unhappy. So let me just repeat. This is a stack spool, like a Coats and Clark or a King Tut, and it wants to come off on the vertical pin. If you have anything else that's cross wound, it really wants to be on the horizontal pin. So when it comes off, this isn't the right one, but it comes off, there's not going to be any twists, right? Let's say you could put a cone on your machine if it fits, but probably not. This cone is small enough, it would probably fit on your thing. So then another option then, if you don't want to use a vertical and you don't want to use a horizontal, is to purchase a thread stand. And some of you may already have a thread stand. We sell two different types, and I'm going to tell you about both of them. This one is less expensive. Price is not on here, but I want to say it's around $13. It's got a heavy base, which is nice, because you don't want this crawling around on your behind your sewing machine. So this is the Dritz. The problem with this, it's not a huge problem, but you can only put cones on it, right? So that's if you want to use cones. And I'm a huge fan of piecing with cones, because you get a lot of thread on a cone. The price-wise, you're saving, it's like a quarter of the price if you buy thread on a cone as opposed to a little spool. However, what I really want to talk about is the Superior Threads makes this. I didn't bring the cardboard that went with it. This is from my house. But the reason I like it is not only could I use a cone, but if I have my King Tut thread, there's a little hole there that I can move my pin over to. And then I take off my little holder there, put on my King Tut. This one's never been put on, so it doesn't have a hole on the other end. Poke through, and that goes back on, and not super tight. I think there's a different one, and I stole this from one of my other sewing machines, and I think I've lost the one that goes on there, but they all kind of fit. So now you could see it's coming off the proper way, just the way I want it. Now I'll bring it down here a little bit, Gabriella, because I need two hands and probably my glasses to run the thread through the little hole. Well, I'll flip it up here. It comes through the little hole, and it comes, this is called a swing arm. So it can swing down or wherever you need it to be. And now I thread my machine the way I normally would thread it. Once it comes off the spool, you run it through your thread. So you're either going to put this to the right of your machine or to the right behind of your machine. And then the swing arm kind of pretends that it's the regular spool of thread. Actually, I got to flip it around so it comes out my left side, and then it runs through. So I use this for quilting sometimes. I use it for embroidery sometimes. I use it for sewing sometimes. Although to be honest, on my Janome 6700, I have two cone holders. So I'm either piecing with a cone or I'm piecing with some cross wound fabric. So thread. So the thread comes up and it comes up the way it wants to come up. I'm telling you all this because if you are having trouble with thread breaking, this might be one of the reasons that maybe your thread is not loaded the right way. And I just want to suggest, you see the machine here, I grew up sewing on this little, not this featherweight, but a featherweight. And this is how I remember it. When I was growing up, there was only 1 or 2 companies making thread, and they were all stacked spools. And this is a vertical pin holder, and they liked the stacked spools like my King Tut. When I graduated to a big girl sewing machine, not that that's not a wonderful sewing machine, it is, I own one. But most of my machines then had horizontal, and this is the kind of thread I was buying. So when you buy a new machine, that's something you want to pay attention to. That's something you want to pay attention to is what kind of pins do you have? Some machines have both kinds of pins. And don't go out and buy a bunch of stack spools if you only have a horizontal pin, or vice versa. So you have to be thinking about that when you're buying thread. Amy wants to know if that stand would be beneficial for using metallic thread for machine embroidery. Yes, I don't think there's really a thread that it wouldn't work with. It's just a kind of a generic holder for any kind of thread, cone, crosswise, or stack spool. It's going to work for everything, especially the Superior Threads version. Again, I'll hold the drits up. It's a great one for cones, but it's only going to work for cones. It's not going to work for your other 2 types of spools. So hopefully that made sense. Again, it's not something people really talk about, but it is an important thing to consider when you are buying thread and working with a new machine. So Austin wants to know, how large is the 16 patch when finished? To be honest, well, you know, in most of my handouts, I try to put the size of the quilt. So let's see if I did that on this handout. I did not. So that's a good question. I had somebody ask me that years ago and ever since, but this is so old I never went back and did it. Let's measure. So that's 24 and 15, so about almost 40 inches wide. But again, you make yours the size of the fabric that you've got. Yes, it is in Ukraine colors. I didn't even notice that until just now. So yeah, good job. There's some really cool Ukraine patterns out there. I just was looking at one yesterday from a girl or a company as Sugar-Free Quilts. And I went on Instagram, and she has some a beautiful pattern with a sunflower all made out of squares. So I may have to make that quilt. Okay, so that was everything about thread. I just wanted you to be aware of one more thing to think about when you're having trouble with thread breakage. This might be the reason why. If you're using, some people use the wrong thread on the right machine and never have trouble, and that's great. But if you're having trouble, that's something to think about. Final thing to talk about is magnetic pins. Again, my middle name is Efficient. So instead of taking a pin out and trying to find my pin cushion, I just like to throw my pins at a magnetic pin holder. And these are the ones that I like the most. This one, they're all on my favorites page. This is just the original one that works great. I put my name in there. So if I take it to a class, I know which one is mine. It comes in different colors. I will say I'm not a huge fan of the pins that it comes with because they're huge and thick and sometimes hard to get through fabric. So I will find a better use for those pins and put my pins on, which happen to be these. This is called a Zirkle. Thank you. It's a Zirkle. It's heavy. It's, I think, $5 more than that one. But the reason I love it is because you kind of throw the pins at it, and most of them end up with the head side out. Sometimes they don't. And usually if I have a kid in my house, they'll come over and they'll play with my pins so they're all pointing out. But most of the time, you throw your pins at it, they end up with that on the outside. So it's easy to grab and go for that. I even have a couple hand sewing needles stored on that. So that's a Zirkle. Love it. And it comes in multiple colors. And then finally, Gabriella, could you hand me that box? Finally, brand new, I was at an art show a few months ago, and I bought this. It's made out of wood, and it has a magnet on the bottom. And I fell in love with it, and I bought this one. And I came home and told Mark about it. And Mark got some, and they come in all these fabulous colors. And I'm not sure if we're going to sell them per color or we're going to choose one for you. To be honest, the colors will vary. but they're made out of real wood with a magnet, and the pins do stick to it really nicely. So we have them in lots of colors, and you'll have to go online because this was all happening real time here. But these are called wood pin magnet, and hopefully they're on my favorites page. If not, they will be soon. And they come in all these gorgeous colors. They're basically stained wood, and she's out of North Carolina, Murphy, North Carolina, and I love these. So at home now, actually, my sister was with me when I bought this, and she said, well, can I have your old one? So I actually gave her my round one to take home with her. And then now I have my Zirkle on my cutting board and this one by my sewing machine. So if I'm cutting anything that needs pins, I put a pin on it. And then when I take the pin out at my sewing machine, and then eventually this one gets full and I have to switch them around. So that was it. Thank you so much for joining me. And we have another question. Mo says, if you take the 3D class, we'll be able to buy the stunning 3D book. Yes. And in fact, you can buy it without taking the class. And the magnetic dishes also hold the order clips. Oh, binder clips? Yes, they do. They hold just about anything that you want to throw at it, really. Dawn, I'm glad you got some use out of my thread information. That is something that everybody should know, and then a lot of people don't. Thank you for all the comments. Thanks for letting us know where you're from. And hopefully you picked up some good tips and some good techniques, and maybe pick up a notion or two on the my favorites page. And again, thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you in one of my classes in the next quarter. Take care. Bye-bye.